Hopefully you can hear me clearly, and welcome to day 2 of Diggers 2022. By way of introduction, my name is Brett Hucker. I'm an Executive Director at Canaccord Genuity, and I'm looking forward to hosting the first session here this morning. First up this morning is a virtual presentation from Champion Iron, Michael Marcotte, and just as a brief introduction, prior to joining Champion in 2018, Michael worked as a VP and partner at Orion Financials from 2004 to 2007, which was acquired by Macquarie Capital Markets in Canada, where he worked as an associate director engaging institutional investors across North America and Europe from 2007 to 2018. So this is a virtual, and I'll hand it over to Michael.
Hi, my name is Michael Marcotte. I'm the Senior Vice President in Corporate Development and Capital Markets at Champion Iron Limited. I'd like to thank the conference organizer to have us at this very prestigious event. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to learn about our company and where we'd like to go. All the information we're going to be presenting today is available on our website. And also, I'd like to point you to our disclaimers, which is also available in additional documents on our website. And the one thing I would like to say for this presentation is that all figures will be quoted or in Canadian dollars unless otherwise stated. When you look at our business, we're an iron ore miner located in northern Quebec, in the Labrador Trough. We produce exclusively high-grade iron ore. The region is known to be the second largest hub of high-grade iron ore exports globally also. We benefit from quite a bit of infrastructure which has spare capacity, and also have very strong involvement directly in our company, where management owns about 10.4% of the company. We also have very strong support from the Quebec government, who's also a significant shareholder at around 9%. And we also benefit from having a few other strategic investors in our company. We started operations in 2018, but benefit from about $4.5 billion of capital invested in the site, primarily from our predecessor. And we've now accumulated a significant amount of resources and reserves outside of our core project, the Bloom Lake mine. But directly at Bloom Lake, we benefit from about 20 years of reserve life. One thing we're very proud about is the way that we operate and how we do it. You can learn a lot more about our operations and the way we manage sustainability in our sustainability report, which is available on our website at championiron.com. But since the beginning of our operations, we haven't had any major environmental issues at the mine site. When we also restarted operations, we made significant investments to reduce emissions at the mine site by nearly 40% compared to the predecessor in our first year of operation. Further to that, just a few weeks ago, we announced our plans in line with the Paris Accord to decarbonize our operations and reduce emissions by 40% by 2030, and also to become net carbon zero by 2050. All these additional details are also available in our sustainability report. When you take a look at our business, I think it's important to understand what's happening in the steel industry. And I know a lot of these themes have probably been occurred and addressed already at the conference per se this week, but there's a few things that I think are important to highlight. Notably, this chart has become quite famous by McKinsey this year. This highlights effectively all major technologies required to decarbonize the planet and all the traditional metals required in each of these technologies. One thing that McKinsey highlighted is that steel is actually the one common element required in every one of these technologies. Now, it's very important to take a step back here and understand that steel also produces about 8% of the emissions globally. So it's very important within those technologies that green steel becomes part of the supply chain. So when we talk about green steel, it also triggers very different type of raw materials. And as an iron ore miner, I think it's important to dissect what is happening and what's currently being mined in the world. So there's about 3 billion tons of iron ore currently mined in the world every year. Now, most of that is direct shipping ore, which is of lesser quality, let's call it. There's only about 30% of the world's iron ore that grades over 65%, which is considered higher grade material. Now, what's important is that there's only about 5% of this iron ore production that qualifies as direct reduction quality, which can be consumed in a different manner within the steel making via a DRI and electric arc process, which reduces emissions significantly in the steel making process. And we'll go into that and why Champion has the ability to take part of the supply chain for the green steel industry. When we look at the iron ore industry per se, the top left chart shows the average grade of the iron ore sector in the last 20 plus years. Now, it's quite obvious that the grades being mined globally have been coming down. And when you look at the bottom chart, what's shown here is all the iron ore deposits mined today. The x-axis is the grade and the y-axis is the primary contaminant or the gangue. You can see that most of the lower grade quality iron ore being mined on the planet today comes primarily from Australia. But in the high grade iron ore, it's also very concentrated in a few countries, notably Brazil and Canada where we are, and Russia and Ukraine. What's important though is what's happening in that little green box on the right hand side. This is what's required as quality to be able to qualify for direct reduction. There are very few ore bodies in the world that have the ability to upgrade the material to be able to qualify within that green box and partake in the green steel transition for the steel industry. Now, why is high grade iron ore this important, you might ask? That's all going back to the steel making route. So when we look today, the steel industry emissions needs to come down by about 90% by 2050 if we want to consider the Paris Accord and its targets. Now, the only known commercial method to reduce emissions in a significant way for the steel industry is to transition from the blast furnace or basic oxygen furnace to a DRI and electric arc steel making route. So when you look at most of the experts on the domain, they see that by 2050, the electric arc will make the most of the steel making method in the world. So today, there's only about 40% of the global industry of the steel being made via electric arc. But in the future, and this chart was done here by Wood Mackenzie, there could be as much as 70+% of the steel making route being done via electric arc. That's important because a traditional blast furnace and basic oxygen furnace steel making process makes about 2 tons of CO2 per ton of steel. Whereas using an electric arc will make anywhere between 0.4 and 1 ton of CO2 per ton of steel, depending on the raw material input. Now, this transition is going to trigger quite a bit of additional raw material demand for very specific metals. The direct reduced iron quality material is expected to go up in demand by over 350% in that kind of time period. And that competes with some of the battery metals that a lot of people talk about required for the green steel transition in the world, simply because there's going to be such an aggressive shift, which we're already starting to see by many steel makers in the US, in Europe, and Greater Asia started to transition their steel making method from blast furnace to electric arc. Now, when you start to just consider Champion and the impact that we have today in the green steel supply chain, or at our nameplate capacity with our phase 2 project that was just recently completed, we have 15 million tons per annum of nameplate capacity. Now, on the left-hand side here, you see the blast furnace and basic oxygen furnace route, which by using our material, which is a higher grade quality at 66.2%, we get to reduce emissions in the blast furnace by about 1.9 million tons of CO2 per year when compared to lower quality material. That's the equivalent of over 400,000 cars that we save in emissions just by using our higher quality material for our customers. If we're to continue our transition, which we're in the process of doing, to have our material qualify for direct reduction, again using that same nameplate capacity, the electric arc process would end up saving nearly 10 million tons of CO2 per year compared to using blast furnace process. Now, these are pretty impactful number when you start to consider the amount of emissions required for steel making, But also, when you start to look into the potential cost savings this triggers for steelmakers, this starts to be pretty impressive in just a few years' time. So there's quite a bit of subsidies being put in place currently for carbon taxes. But in the next few years, most steel companies will be fully exposed in the developed world to carbon taxes. And when we look at the forward curve, just within the next few years, using those same math that we did in the previous slide, those 1.9 million tons of CO2 per year for a steelmaker to use our material ends up triggering a cost saving just for the carbon taxes of nearly $170 million a year. Conversely, the same thing or the same math applies if we were to use our material into the electric arc process. A steelmaker would end up saving close to $1 billion a year by consuming our material in a direct reduction matter through an electric arc rather than producing steel via a blast furnace process. So what we're trying to say here is that there is significant incentives expected to occur for steelmakers to migrate upward in the value chain of green iron ore, where for blast furnace producers, there is going to be a higher trend to use more higher grade to save on carbon taxes, and there's going to be a higher push for steelmakers to transition to electric arc simply because of those additional carbon taxes exposure in a few years. Now, in addition to our higher quality product, we do benefit from one of the best jurisdictions in the world for access to renewable hydropower. And that really positions Champion as a market leader for Scope 1 emissions. When we look on this chart here, this is all the high-grade iron ore producers in the world. And when you look at the y-axis, this is the kilos of CO2 of emissions produced per producer of iron ore per ton. So Canada ranks as one of the better jurisdictions in the world simply because most of our power sourcing comes from renewable power. So as a conclusion, not only do we make a significant impact of reducing emissions in the steelmaking process because of our higher quality product, but also at the source, we benefit from having a one or better position Scope 1 and Scope 2. And this last chart here on the market before I jump to our company is quite interesting. This was done by Wood Mackenzie to consider where are the sources of high-grade iron ore in the world that could help the steel industry transition over the next 3 to 4 decades. And it was interesting to see the concentration of these projects. So we can see here all these circles represent the resources and reserves of known producers for high-grade iron ore and projects. Now, there's Brazil, that's arguably been the largest producer in the world historically. There's also Russia and Ukraine. And then there's the Labrador Trough where we operate, and we're also surrounded by Rio Tinto or IOC, Iron Ore of Canada, and ArcelorMittal. Now there's also Simandou on this chart that people always refer to as one of the next projects in the industry. We would highlight, however, that Simandou as currently proposed does not qualify for direct reduction quality material. When we jump into our company, as mentioned earlier, we've been in operation since 2018 or fiscal 2019 for Champion. We've made significant investments since we took over the mine from the predecessor to reduce the operating costs and maximize the output of the mine. So since we recommissioned the mine, we've nearly halved the operating cost versus our predecessor, and we also increased throughput by about 30%. Now we've had quite a bit of stability on the output for the last 4 years, and when we look at the bottom chart, it shows our cost position within the industry. And this is adjusted for value in use, or adjusted for the high grade or low grade discounts, high grade premium and low grade discounts, and also adjusted for freight. So we've traditionally positioned within the first or second quartile within the industry, depending on where the premiums have been since we started our operations. But I think what's important to highlight here is that we've repositioned the mine to compete globally. We're the oligopoly that control over 70% of the iron ore supply. When you look at our results, just after 4 years, we're already in net cash position. And we'll discuss this in a little bit, but we just finished also a major project. With this, we just announced this year our first dividend to congratulate the support of our early shareholders, and our board is going to be evaluating a dividend payment every semi-annual and annual payment, an annual period going forward. In our last fiscal year, which finished March 31st, we did just over $500 million in net income. Again, these are Canadian dollars, and just shy of $1 billion of EBITDA. And our current market cap is roughly about $2.5 billion. Again, all Canadian dollars. When we look into the future, we're pretty excited about what's ahead for Champion. The figures that I showed you earlier on production were all from our first plant, and which we call Phase 1. We just announced a few weeks ago in May that we had completed our first shipment from our Phase 2 project. This has been a long-coming project in the region that started nearly 10 years ago. This was a $1.6 billion US project that was started by our predecessor, which we just completed. And congratulations to all of our staff and all of our partners, because we've actually managed to finish the project ahead of schedule. We're currently in the process of ramping up that project and should be to commercial production by the end of this calendar year. What did this project do? It takes our material from, it takes our production from 7.4 million tons of nameplate capacity to 15 million tons of nameplate capacity of 66.2% Fe material. Now we have quite a bit of additional growth projects ahead, but we also just announced in May also the acquisition of an old pelletizer that's at the port where we currently export a material. This plant was owned by the Quebec government up to now, and we've committed to doing a study to recommission the plant in 2013. To be completed in 2023. The plant, which was put on care and maintenance in 2013, however, will require significant investments to be refurbished. The plan here is to look to do direct reduction pellets with a new steel making partner, which we've announced via a press release just a few weeks ago. So pending the results of the feasibility study in 2023, we'll be looking to take the project forward potentially with this partner. Now, why is direct reduction pellet this important? Well, one, you actually need it as a feed for direct reduced iron, so DRI, which again is a primary feed that competes with the likes of scrap for electric arcs. So what's interesting, however, is to look at historically the premium for this kind of product ends up being a significant premium to the P65 index, which we use for a 66.2% material. Today, the DR pellets trade at $67 a ton premium to the P65 index. And as you can see on the chart on the bottom right, Canada has historically been a very well-known producer of pellets in the world, with our neighbors having produced pellets here for decades. So we do think there's quite a bit of expertise here in the region, and we do think that this kind of product will be in rising demand as there is more and more transition from blast furnace steel makers into electric arc steel makers. So when we look short term, we have quite a few studies that we're working on. We've been preparing the business in anticipation to prepare for post Phase 2 growth. So we have 3 distinct studies that should be coming out in the next year or so. In the fairly short term, we should release a study on an additional plant, which will be in addition to our current recovery circuit, to upgrade half of our production nameplate capacity to a 69% product. We've proven our ability to produce 68% with our current flow sheet, which qualifies for direct reduction. But to optimize our product quality and optimize our recoveries and arguably optimize as well the recovery on our pricing, we think 69% is also the better quality product required for higher quality DRI. And accordingly, we're going to be doing an additional regrinding and flotation circuit. So a study should be coming out on that very shortly. We acquired as well, just about a year ago, a very large-scale project just a few kilometers east of our producing Bloom Lake mine, which is called the Kami project. We are expected to have a feasibility study on this project as well by the end of this year. And just as mentioned, we're also working on the feasibility study for the DR pellet plant, which will be done in 2023. Just to make it clear, the 69% feed product, so the additional flotation circuit, would be used as feed for the DR pellet plant once completed. So when we take a step back, also we on the vision for rising demand for higher quality material, we've been consolidating quite a bit of resources in the sector in the last few years. So combined today, we own about the equivalent of 10 different Bloom Lakes within our portfolio near infrastructure in Quebec. So we've consolidated most of those projects. Bloom Lake is also royalty free, and most of the resources south of Bloom Lake are also royalty free. So we do think that we have the ability here to produce for decades and decades on, but also take the opportunity to respond to the rising demand for direct reduction quality material by potentially bringing on more material to market in the right time. And the other thing as well that we've been working on for the last several quarters is an innovation we've been seeing with a partner in Europe to do cold pelletizing technology. So we've been working with this partner now for some time. It's very promising laboratory results, and so far it demonstrates the ability to do agglomeration of iron ore into pellets and reduce emissions by about 95%. And the one thing as well that I would like to highlight in closing is the lack of capital that's been allocated to the industry. It's very difficult to know what's going to happen with demand. The market is very volatile. However, one thing that's very clear is that there's no new supply of scale hitting the market. When you look at the top left, what killed the iron ore market last cycle was a significant sprint of investments by the majors. From 2010 to 2015, you had nearly $30 billion US per year allocated to new projects, new growth projects in the sector. What happened in that exact same time period was an increase in supply by nearly 50%. And that got iron ore prices to collapse when demand came down. Unlike this cycle, we've seen a very small amount of capital investment in the sector in the last several years. And we've seen supply has actually been flat, if not actually shrinking, because of some disruptions we've seen in the industry, notably some significant, unfortunate tailing dam breaks in Brazil, and now also the quite terrible situation in Ukraine and Russia. And at the bottom here, you can see as well that the situation in Ukraine and Russia is also creating a major void in high-grade products within the industry, which probably requires more stable jurisdiction to be able to feed iron ore or to feed steel producers that are looking to transition to electric arc globally. Now, in closing, I'd like to say that we're quite proud of our people. We're producing high-purity iron ore with one of the highest standards in the world. And it's really with the efforts of our people that we get to unlock more and more the opportunities for the region and create such a positive impact for the community. The one thing I would like to say as well is that we'd like to see you in person. So we apologize for not being there with you, but we'd welcome anyone that's like to come and visit us at Bloom Lake directly. And if you would like to get more information, I'd welcome you to contact me directly. You can contact us at info@championiron.com. And again, it'll be a pleasure to be in touch and tell you more about our company. So again, thank you very much for having us at this prestigious event, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the presentation. Just given that was a virtual, there won't be any Q&A for that session.